Hello there, sword friends. This is going to be a simple review on a Hanwei Tiger Elite Katana. The first thing that I often start out with is the biases that I have, or things that you should know before you hear my thoughts on anything else. The first thing that you need to know in that regard is that this is not my property. I'm selling it on behalf of a friend of mine, and they bought it from a distributor new. So it should be, in my mind, at least representative of what you would expect to buy if you bought one new from Cult of Athena or another authorized distributor. But know that it's not my property. So I didn't buy it, I didn't spend my money on it, and I'm selling it on behalf of a friend of mine, but I thought it was a good chance to do a review on it while I have it in my possession. The second thing you need to know is that to preserve the item's value, to make it worth as much for resale as possible, since that's really actually why I have it in hand, I'm not going to be doing any cutting with it. So I'm making some observations in the review about the manufacturing quality, some lines, some things that are pretty easy to see in photos, but most of my critiquing about how well it works or cuts is really going to have to be theoretical. I'll put some information that's a little more tangible later in the review, but know that I'm not actually going to cut anything with the sword. The last thing that you need to know is that I am not being coaxed, paid, or employed, or affiliated with Hanwei, so all of that type of stuff. This, as I noted, is the property of a friend of mine, and I'm doing the review just so that you have supplemental information if you were thinking about buying one. But nobody from Hanwei contacted me and asked me to do the review. I'm not being paid to do it. Lord knows that'd be nice if I was, but not the case. And yeah, so also know I'm kind of a fan of Hanwei. I like their products and stuff, but I don't think that removes my objectivity, so to speak. I'll probably be a little bitchy about this one. Anyway, on with the show. So as I often do, we will start from the kashra, the pommel, the end little bit here on the handle. And the thing I would note about this is that the casting quality from Hanwei is usually pretty good, and this is really no exception. The lines on this actually line up really well, and I don't get my finger to snag on anything. The edge is actually a little bit sharp, not terribly, and it wouldn't necessarily bite into you, but it's a little less comfortable to hold than you might expect, at least in a bare hand. It also has this kind of braiding that goes underneath the kashra, which I'd assume will help it kind of hang on if it comes unglued or undone. But in any case, it's a little bit different, and I do wonder from a function standpoint, if you're kind of rubbing on the end of a kashra, if that's going to fray or cause problems loosening over time. In any respect, the casting quality is good, and they've lined it up really, really well with the rest of the handle. Onto the ska, or the handle itself, and the first thing that I'll note is that it's a black silk, and the wrap on this one is one of the tightest wraps that I have seen on a Hanwei katana. Now, this one is a few years old at this point, and it just sat on a shelf. It wasn't really used. But nevertheless, right out of the box, this is a much tighter ito than I have seen from other Hanwei swords. For the sake of comparison, I have a Hanwei Bamboo Mat and a Hanwei Oni, both of which are in pretty reasonably newish condition, don't look like they've been handled a whole lot, and you can see my fingers moving the ito around quite a bit easier than they do on this Tiger katana. Now on the ito, I can notice where the panel begins. That's not necessarily something that's bad, but it does stand out perhaps a little bit more so on this blade than I have seen on others. Underneath, I can make out some reasonably large nodules in the samegawa. I don't see an emperor node, but I do see a panel that at least has some character to it. The minuki are, I would say, kind of the muddiest piece of the casting quality here. They stand out. They're a little bit bolder in terms of the gold that's used on them than the rest of the sword. You notice a little gold line on the kashra, and later you'll see on the Tsuba there's some kind of, I don't know, it's not actual gold, but there is a gold color, a brass, or kind of a plating on the Tsuba that looks like this. And this is just a much bolder gold than the rest of the sword. So I don't know. Personally, I don't really like that, though. I don't like that the Minuki stand out as a much brighter gold color than the rest of the fittings. If there's going to be gold on the fittings, I kind of want it to all be the same. That's one little critique, I suppose, I would have. Other than that, though, the ska actually feels good. It is a substantial, meaty Hanwei ska, but I noticed that it has a nice wasting to it. It feels actually pretty comfortable in my hand, and out of many of the Hanwei skas that I felt, this is an improvement. I kind of like the way this one feels. Out of the box, it's not bad at all. Another component to the handle is taking it apart. So what I'm going to do here quick is just take the Mikugi out and see how easily this one comes apart. I've just removed the Mikugi for the first time, and we will see how well it comes apart. Ugh. Not very easily. Now, if the unit had budged around at all, or if the handle had come off at all, or given any kind of wiggle, I'd do the rest and take it off. But again, as this is a friend of mine's sword and I might have to be a little aggressive with it to get it to come apart, I'm going to leave well enough alone and put it back together. Now that's a little bit of a disappointment, but also kind of a positive thing. A lot of people don't ever take the handle off the sword. So on one side, it's not very good that it doesn't come apart easily, or that you really have to fire it up to, or whack it with a hammer to take it off. It's going to be important if you do a lot of cutting or something like that and water gets down in the handle and yada yada yada. But it's all fit really, really tight right now, which from the more likely user, the end location that this will end up, the person may not take the handle off. And if that's the case, given how tight it is right now, it's likely to stay that way for a bit longer. So I suppose that's a good thing, at least if you never plan on taking it apart. Next, I'll talk about the fuchi. Now, the fuchi does also fit on actually really well. The casting quality between the kashira and the fuchi up here line up really, really well. I'm very happy about that. And again, this is actually one of the better fit examples of a Hanwei fuchi that I have seen. They line the silk up and the transitions quite well. For contrast, I can bring up this Hanwei bamboo mat again. That I brought up just a moment ago, and what you can see is that at a glance from the camera this may look good, but I can get my fingernail up here on the fuchi. There's a ledge here that, you know, if you ride up here or depending on your grip, may kind of irritate your hands. The kashira is fit on reasonably well, but again, there's a little bit of a lip here with a kind of sharp edge that bites into my hand just ever so slightly. Not a huge deal, not a big deal, but it's not perfect. And, well, it's at least a lot further away from perfect than this Tiger Elite over here is. One other note about the handle is that given that I'm unable to take it off, at least easily, and again, I apologize for that because I'd like to take it off and one, examine if the handle is cracked, and two, show you the nakago on the Hanwei pieces. Hanwei tends to do a lot better job on the actual nakago of the blade than most other manufacturers do. They put a little bit more emphasis on how it looks and some of the file marks and the signature, and it's a piece that largely goes unseen. So unfortunately, to preserve quality and the integrity of this piece, I'm not going to do that because I think it would defeat the purpose of why I really have it, or at least go against it. But you know, that would be something I would like to do, and that's why. So we will assume that the unit is not cracked, or that the handle isn't cracked. I don't necessarily know if it is, but what I can do is I can move the sword around and kind of try to throw it forward, and I don't feel the nakago rattling around or any flex or motion in the handle. Doesn't necessarily mean it isn't cracked, but it's a good sign that if the crack were severe, I would probably feel some motion. Something would wiggle around here, and it doesn't. Now we can talk about the Tsuba, and the Tsuba I think is the stylistic piece that I probably have a lot to say about, because I honestly think it's a pretty good impersonation of Goto. Maybe I'm not saying it right, or maybe I've got the thematic theme wrong, but in a lot of Japanese fittings, you see dragons and tigers, a black background Tsuba with, you know, golden characters that show up really blingy, and there's a lot of great detail and a lot of really amazing artwork that's been made in that thematic style, which I believe you call Goto. It's black and bedazzly and shiny and cool looking, and when people try to impersonate it, or the cheap fittings that you see on some katanas try to do an impersonation of Goto, it often comes off detracting from the experience from me, because the casts that they use aren't the same as carvings, and it loses a lot of detail. The plating that they put on for gold is kind of muddy and kind of haphazardly placed, at least it seems that way at times. And this one, if you want a Goto fittings, I think is maybe the best example that I've seen. The gold doesn't seem to be just slopped on everywhere. It's used tactfully. It's not overly bright, and so it doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't have a really chintzy look to it, in my opinion. And the casting quality on the Tiger is quite good for a casting quality. I mean, it's not the same as if you were to have a kind of hand carved example from a historic period, or an actual Goto with gold. You get what I'm saying. It's not the real thing, but it is a reasonably good representation of what it's supposed to be, without really kind of losing the spirit, I suppose. I like the Tsuba quite a lot, actually. There's little details where the Tiger kind of wraps around the edge here ever so slightly, and the rest of the rim being flat. Hanwei's casting quality with their fitting seems to be quite good, and this is kind of a shining example of that, I think. I really very rarely appreciate cast fittings in a Goto style theme, and this one I think actually did it did it quite well. The Tsuba is different than the original Tiger. This is the kind of second version of the Tiger Katana Tsuba, and I like it. It's big, it's hardy, and it has some style and appeal that I find very nice. While I have this out, I can show you the habaki. Now the habaki is kind of the larger standard Hanwei brass with rain pattern habaki. The thing is that it's got a gold color and it doesn't really match the brass. The brass on the habaki and seppa look ever so different. This is a softer kind of look, and this is a little shinier, and the Manuki yet are even shinier than that. So there's 3 different colors of goldish color on it, and that is something I think would be better if they were all consistent or the same. Ideally, this kind of subtle goldish color here. Anyway, that's a little bit of a nitpick. There's no performance difference on here in terms of it being a different color. That doesn't really affect performance at all. Habaki-wise, everything is tight, reasonably well fit. It's a pretty kind of standard run-of-the-mill production habaki. Now we can talk about the saya. Now the saya, just on the exterior side of things, what you're going to notice is that you have an ishime kind of textured stone-looking saya on the outside, and it has these kind of gloss teeth. These are not inlaid. There is a texture to them. You can hear as I run my finger over it. There's just a little bit of texture there, but really they're flat, and it's really well done. I think it has a very nice aesthetic appeal to it. They also have a kurikata, koiguchi, and kojiri. So the koiguchi is this mouth on the side. And one thing that I've noticed is that the Hanwei koiguchis tend to have this, if they put a piece on here, it tends to have a metal cap around. So from a user perspective, if you're doing noto and putting your sword away, it might be easy to scrape the tip on this metal piece. You just have to be a little bit cautious when you do that, because it's not horn, it's could be abrasive on the tip. I'd also note that the saya doesn't have the same refinement in thresholds or lines or transitions that the ska does. You'll notice here that the koiguchi doesn't exactly line up very even with the saya. It's a little bit larger than the fuchi here, and it looks a little muddy. The casting quality is good, but it just kind of looks like it was glued on and it's not as precise as the rest of the fittings that were placed are. It has this ledge here, which I don't think is the end of the world. It's not that bad, but it's a line that causes me to notice it and take pause. The koiguchi as well, as you may have just noticed there, doesn't hold the habaki super well. It's pretty loose. A simple shim could fix that, though. It's not terribly loose, and given how old this is and where it's sat and the temperature differentiations, it's not something that I would really hold against it. It seems like a very easy thing to solve with a shim, or something I would consider pretty standard that it's not holding on. Now, I noted the dental work here, or the kind of textured pattern here. I don't exactly know what you call it, this kind of striping that you see on the side. It's just paint, though. There's no carving or engraving. The kurikata is also something that I actually like a lot more than any other kurikata I've seen from Hanwei. What you'll notice is that it has a nice kind of, I don't know exactly what you'd call this, but this broken lacquer pattern on the outside of it that matches the rest of the fittings. But there's no goofy shitadome on here. And what that means, if I can get my hand out of the light, is that I'm actually able to move the sageo in and out of it and take it in and out or change it reasonably easy. As an example, with this Hanwei bamboo mat, you can see this is pretty large for a small sageo here, but you have these shitadome pieces here, and it's tough to get the sageo to fit in and out of these. Quite often you'll see kurigata be a lot smaller or a lot more cumbersome to use, so I like that this is more open and that I can actually get something in and out of it. The Ecma Lacquer is pretty good. I like that it doesn't show fingerprints that easy. The sageo, I'm not sure if this is the original sageo to this sword or not. In fact, now I'm pretty sure that it's not. I've just looked at a picture of the original, and the original looks to be a simple black. This was replaced by my buddy who put on a longer sageo. He studies Toyama Ryu, and sometimes the factory sageos are a little too short to tie into your obi properly. This one, though, I think actually complements the sword a little bit better than a plain black. It meshes with the white same, and frankly, it's a positive addition in my mind. You can also see this bit of bamboo stenciling, bamboo leaves. Again, it's a small addition. It's on the side that would face outward. I can't remember, is it the emote side? But you would see this, it really only kind of shows up in the right light. if I block the light from it, it almost disappears. But as soon as you kind of get it in the right light, this bamboo stencil shows up. That brings us to the kojiri, the end cap, which is kind of nice. If you place your sword on the ground or it touches, it's not as likely to bite in or get dinged as it would be if it were horn or just painted. But this one, well, the casting quality again is really quite good. This transition lip here is something that leaves a lot to be desired in my mind. This should be flat. At least that's what I see here in the ska. And these transitions are not good. Plus, is I think if I'm moving it around, or if I do any kind of kata from the ground and I pull my scabbard out, or I'm doing sayabiki and I'm moving this around, if this were to snag on the ground, it might just yank right off. It doesn't seem like it's loose or anything like that, but that lip on a metal cap seems like it's a recipe to have problems later on. The other thing to note about the saya is that it does have some rattle. It's not substantial, and there doesn't seem to be any significant spots of saya rub, but it does rattle a little bit. Now we can talk about the pointy stabby part. And the first thing that I'm going to draw your attention to is this bold hamon pattern, or this bold hara pattern, this wood grain pattern on the surface of the blade. It's really quite easy to see. It's very nice. It shows me some character in the steel. The steel is supposed to be KC 120 Swedish powder steel. I say supposedly because I don't really know if it is, and I have no real way of verifying, but I trust Hanwei. That's very likely what it is. The polish is divided into a couple different sections here. So this spine, this part of the blade, has a mirror polish, and then you can see it gets a little grayer along the bevel section of the blade, and then it turns into this kind of white line where the hamon, or the temper line, is. Now, there's some pros and cons there. Now, I just want to draw attention that there are some subtleties to the polish that do show up with the mirror polish and then the kind of heavy etch section. None of the lines are particularly crisp. The shinogi line, the shinogi G here, is not really crisp and clean in terms of polish, but for what this sword is and its price point, I don't really expect a lot more. The thing is that while I see the hara pattern, the wood grain pattern on the blade, I can't see much in the hamon. Now, I don't want to gripe about this too much because it's just what Hanwei does. They do it on a lot of their swords, but this kind of stark white temper line lets you know that it's there and it has an interesting pattern to it, but all the details underneath there are really obscured by this really heavy etch. Underneath that hamon line there is a lot of interesting metallurgical effects that I would like to see, but could only be brought out with a different kind of polish. So for what Hanwei was trying to achieve, I think they did it well. There's no blemishes, there's nothing messed up in there. It's quite good. I don't see any giant spots of saya rub or anything like that. So I think they did what they were trying to do quite well, but I would like to see something different, especially on a blade in the higher end category like this one. The gripe I do have about the polish is in the kasaki, the tip area here, and it's probably tough to make out in the light, but there's supposed to be a thing called a yakote, and I can kind of see that they've made a line there, like they were going to polish it on and then change their minds, and it's just not very well done. It's not really there at all. In fact, there's no attempt at burnishing. There's really nothing there, and I would like to see a yakote and burnishing again in the polish. That would be something I would like. I understand it probably takes some time, but I would definitely like to see that in the kasaki area. But as it is right now, at least it's not super muddy or broken or bad, and it follows a consistent theme, I guess, polish wise, so it's not bad. Continuing on with the pointy stabby part, I talked about the polish. Now I can talk about the rest of the blade. The blade is a Elite series from Hanwei, which, from what I understand of the Elite series, it's supposed to be a pretty substantial kind of medium hard target cutter with a really wide profile here and maintaining some pretty significant width. This is an inch wide at the tip, which is wider than some katanas start with at the base. It also isn't necessarily all that thin. It's a little thinner than some, but not really drastically so. It's about the same thickness as your average katana, which just makes it kind of a big honking sword, but with more priority given to doing kind of tatami mat cutting or larger tatami rolls or maybe some bamboo cutting. As far as I know, that's kind of what the Elite series is geared toward, and you need a substantial blade to do that. So that's why you have this kind of substantial, thick, hardy looking blade here. The manufacturer Hanwei advertises this as a 1 inch or a 3/4 inch, sorry, but mine is actually 1 inch. And rather than having the deepest part of the sword here, it's actually about here, which is a little further up. I'm not sure dynamically how that changes the performance of the blade. I didn't have a problem when I talk about function or use. I did swing the sword around a little bit. I didn't cut with it, and I didn't really have a problem drawing it, despite the 1-inch Sori. Sometimes they're a little weird to draw. I didn't have a problem doing it. It's about a half-inch deeper Sori than the blade I typically use. I didn't have a problem moving it around. I didn't find it to be strange to move as well. I don't know if the Sori affects that or not, but just in terms of moving, what you can see me doing is moving it around on a really cold day, and I'm kind of ice skating while I do it. It's not an uncomfortable blade to move. Now, the thing that I guess I would say is, as I show you, you see me moving it around, I didn't really have any discomfort. Also, here are some of the information from the Sword Dynamic computer. Hopefully it does a better tangible job of showing you how or why it feels the way it does than my explanation. The best thing I could say is that it doesn't really feel alive or dead. It's not cumbersome to start or stop moving, but it's not easy at the same time. For the size of blade that it is, it's pretty much on par with what I would expect, which is, meeting expectations at this point is kind of a good thing. The fact that it wasn't cumbersome or really dead feeling is, or felt like a club is a positive when you're making a sword as substantial as this one. So it does feel on the tip heavy side, but for what you're trying to do with this sword, that seems about right. It doesn't seem like it shouldn't feel tip heavy, given that it's meant to kind of move through some more substantial targets. Anyway, overall, I found it to be a reasonably comfortable experience, but it didn't wow me. I give it like a 5 out of 10 when I talk about how well it moved. There's been other Hanwei blades that have impressed me a lot more in terms of how they felt. This one didn't feel bad, and it seemed right where it was supposed to be, I guess, for its intended purpose of cutting tatami and stuff. It seems like it has that kind of feeling, but not in a wildly impressive way. Now, maybe that is something I can attribute to the differences between what the manufacturer advertised versus what I got. So the blade is advertised at 29 inches long. This one's just a hair shy of 29 inches long, but within reasonable variation. I won't throw up any poo-poo flags there. The handle is advertised at 11. Mine is 11 1/4. Again, pretty reasonable. Doesn't throw me off really much at all. Feels fine. Nothing stands out, and I'd expect a 1/4 inch of variation in that way is acceptable. The other dimensions that I have in terms of point of balance, it's about a 1/2 inch higher than I got, but again, that's reasonable. Width of the guard, width of the tip, thickness in both are not quite. I got some minor differences, but very, very close, actually. I mean, I would consider these very, very close. The Sori being a full inch versus 3/4 is probably the biggest deal in terms of the measurements that I've noted so far. A 3/4 inch Sori versus an inch Sori, that might be a tipping point for some in terms of variation. That extra 1/4 inch can really change how swooping the blade is versus how straight it is. I mean, a 1/2 inch is really close to a straight blade. A full inch has a very pronounced kind of steep curve like this one does. So, I would say more accuracy in there would probably be good. But the main complaint I would have in terms of the differences is that it's advertised at 2 pounds 8 ounces on the Hanwei website, and this one comes in at 2 pounds 12 ounces. Now, 4 ounces might not sound like a lot, but even the difference of an ounce at the end of a blade or distributed can make a difference in how a blade handles in terms of its feeling. Now, if they're measuring 2 pounds 8 ounces, there's variations of this sword, I'm given to presume, that are 4 ounces less than this one, and maybe some that sweep the other way. I don't know what kind of variation we're talking about here, but 4 ounces is a pretty substantial thing and might be a deal breaker. 2 pounds 8 ounces is I would say within reason. It's kind of on the medium to medium light side or medium high, but it plays in the medium realm of swords. 2 pounds 12 ounces starts to get into the medium heavy side of things, and that might be more than what some people want to swing around. So I know that sounds small and maybe but 4 ounces of difference is kind of surprising given how close all the other measurements were, that there's an extra 4 ounces in this blade than what they measured. And I would just say that is probably the most significant difference is the weight. And maybe that's contributing to why this one feels dead. By comparison, I had a Munetoshi performance cutting blade with similar proportions and dimensions, a little bit smaller blade, and it also weighed closer to the 2 pounds, 8-ish ounces, I think. And it had a very lively presence. So maybe if this one was the lighter version, it would be wowing me in terms of how it feels. As to right now, it just kind of feels, okay, but not bad, but, not wowing me. So now, as I'm editing this video, I do realize that it's difficult to conceptualize what 4 ounces of metal looks like on a sword. And in fairness, it's tough for me to really show you that. So, well, it's not actually that hard. I happen to have this little sumbitch right here, which is the broken kisaki, or broken tip, of a Jayco Tsunami sword that I reviewed some time ago. And it just so happens that this little piece right here weighs about 4 ounces. And I think it's maybe a good example of what 4 ounces looks like in a sword. So as I'm saying, the dynamic properties of a sword can change very substantially over 4 ounces. Comparing and contrasting what I felt at 2 pounds 8 ounces feeling good on a different sword, and that I find that to be cumbersome or weird. It sounds a little nitpicky and bitchy if you can't really think about it. After all, 4 ounces of, well, most things doesn't really amount to a lot. But here is, another katana made out of what's supposed to be, I think, T10 steel, a different steel. Whether or not it's denser or not is maybe arbitrary at this point. But the point is that here is a visual example of what 4 inches of steel or 4 ounces of steel can look like on a sword, and it equates to a pretty reasonable chunk of steel. That's the difference I see. Now, the other thing to note is that this blade costs $1,650 on the Hanwei website, and it can be had for $1,088 as of right now, January 2018, on Cult of Athena's website. And that kind of brings me to the point, do I actually think it's worth it? Honestly, that's a tough question to answer, and I'm really having trouble wrapping my head around it. And my short answer is yes and no, as it is for so many things. I don't think it's a bad deal, first of all. $1,088 is a lot of money. You have other options in that category. This seems like a very valid, good option if you want something that has the aesthetics that look like kind of my at least stereotypical idea of a classic or elegant katana, with the black saya, black silk ito, white same. This seems like a good option. It has folded steel. It has some nice talking points, some nice features as a katana goes. And yeah, so aesthetically, I like it. Performance-wise, I moved it around and it didn't wow me. So if you were going to use this for cutting, I don't think it would do a bad job. It has the elite geometry. I've cut with other blades with similar geometry from Hanwei, and they've all performed, quite amicably. But this is a really expensive thing for a geometry you can get for a lot less money. The Practical XL is around $200-ish. The Practical Elite is, I don't know, maybe $400-ish, somewhere in there. So you can get this geometry style performance for about the same. And the folded steel doesn't add really performance. It adds aesthetics, but it doesn't really do much performance-wise. So if performance is what you're after, I think you can get it for less money. And if you want something elegant in performing, this doesn't seem like a bad option, but it didn't wow me. I think for $1,088, you really want to be wowed when I hold it and feel it and think that it should move in a particular way. It didn't disappoint me either. It's not bad, but it kind of gets like, the C. It gets the average score in terms of performance. And maybe that's because this is heavier than advertised, and if it were 4 ounces lighter, I've had blades with similar geometries in that weight, and I don't know, maybe some magic would have happened. And maybe it will for you, because, it says 2 pounds 8 ounces. Maybe there's more out there in that weight range. I'm hoping so. But if your intention was use, I don't know, it didn't seem bad, but it seems like you can get it for less money. If you're a collector, then what the hell am I going to tell you? These aren't limited, so I don't think it's a great investment, but, they're not super common either. I don't think it's going to be something that appreciates in money, but if you like the way it looks, then, hey, collect away, do what you like. In terms of the people that are looking for a really awesome sword for home defense and they don't study martial arts, as a decoration, it's fine. But I don't think the folded steel and the differential hardening is going to be particularly forgiving of bad technique. At least it's not for me. I've seen a lot of these KC-120 blades from Hanwei, and there's a perfectly fine functional steel, but it's subject to bending on bad cuts. And this is something that's really intended to be kind of a heavy cutter. So I don't think that I would recommend it if that's the case. But if you like the aesthetics, if you're into heavy cutting, or you want a decoration like this, I don't think you're getting ripped off at $1,088. I just think that there's a lot of other options on the table that you want to consider pretty heavily depending on what you want to do. At this weight, I wouldn't certainly recommend it if you're doing EI, though I admit, at least in my mind, there's a lot of blades out there that I wouldn't want to see anyone using for EI. And then I will go to an event and I will see somebody using a really heavy sword for EI and loving it and giving all sorts of accolades about how it's helped their technique. So while I might not think it's good, I can't argue that some people might. It doesn't feel awkward or unbalanced or cumbersome or rattly or bad. There's nothing functionally wise that would prevent it from you other than the weight being a little cumbersome. So the reason I say yeah and no is there's things I really like about it, and I like that it's Hanwei. It's one of the higher end pieces. I like the aesthetics. I wouldn't mind having it. It's a beautiful blade, and I really like their it's one of the first things that I've seen an attempt at this kind of Japanese style of theme, like this Goto theme with black and gold that hasn't been gaudy and stupid, but is still a mass reproduction piece. So from that side of things, I'm quite impressed. But, I'm tempered by the fact that $1,000 is a lot of money and there's other stuff out there. So I hope that helps make sense. I know you probably want a yay or nay answer, and I'm kind of at maybe. But I hope what I've showed you so far at least provides you with some supplemental information if you were thinking about buying one. And really, that's all I got. So anyway, as always, cheers and thanks for watching.